Hi, everyone. Super excited to be sharing this session with Kevin Nakao. Kevin has been a long time friend and partner on the Insight 7 journey. And yeah, I couldn't be more excited to chat about data-driven positioning and messaging with Kevin. Kevin is a veteran growth and revenue executive with over 20 years of experience scaling tech companies across industries. Currently, he runs Rev GTM, a startup advisory company helping startups across different industry scale. And before that, he's done revenue growth as VP at Spire, Spire Global and Remitly, where he's built high performing teams and consistently delivered excellent results. Now, Kevin brings deep expertise in marketing and customer success. And Kevin also holds an MBA from Harvard, which is incredible. So, Kevin, I'm super excited to have you join me on this session today.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. And it's been just fun watching you just build things and just be ahead of the game. And we're finally going to get to where you are. But thank you for guiding us there.
Yeah, super excited. So, Kevin, today we're going to be chatting about data-driven messaging and positioning, right? And it's one of those things, one of those areas, one of those topics where as a founder you just have to figure it out, right? You don't have a lot of expertise or experience, but you kind of iterate and figure out how to place your product into the market. But the core of this concept starts with brand, right? So how do you define brand?
Yeah, there's a lot of different definitions. I love, I think that Jeff Bezos came up with this one, which is, what do customers think about you? And I love that definition because you can actually measure it through surveys. So, I like to think of brand and positioning as kind of the battle for hearts and minds. And brand is how you feel about the company. That's a battle for my heart. And positioning is how I think about the company in the context of what I need to do, what my other choices are. And I think both are important and both are measurable. I really love the fact that we've moved from a world where it was just a lot about opinions about what was right or wrong on a web page and a positioning. And I feel like data has really democratized ideas and helped us have a more open mind of what we could do and let data pick the winner versus the biggest ego or person in the room.
Fantastic. And how do you define messaging and positioning? Like, what's your take on that topic?
Yeah, so positioning really is, there's two parts of it. There's you as a company, what you want your customers to think about you, and then how your customers actually feel about you. And I think one of the things to remember is we will spend hours, every hour of the day, thinking about how I want to position myself to my customers. But they're only going to give you 2 seconds and maybe a second of their time share. So I think it's really important sometimes to realize that the most important thing to you is the least important thing to your customer. And one of the best books on positioning, it was called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind by Reyes and Trout, was really about 2 points. One, everybody has a ton of messages, and so you're kind of battling through all those other messages. Two, you got to keep things really simple. They're only remember one thing. What do you think about when you think of Volvo? Safety. What do you think about BMW? Luxury. What do you think about Costco? Quality and quantity. And so you really have to understand that from a customer point of view, keep it simple, keep it memorable, and make it believable in terms of what you're trying to position.
Got it. So it sounds to me like there's some learning involved in this process. So what role does data play in messaging and positioning?
Yeah, first is also there's a little bit of context switching too. So when you work in product marketing, right, on the one hand, you're responsible for bringing the product to market, but you also play a role in PR. And what I find in PR is what is newsworthy need to be first. You need to be number one. That actually may not be important to a customer. So now that you switch to what's important to a customer, that's where data becomes important, is because you really want to understand how does the customer think about these things. First, they don't care if you're first or last. They just want something that serves your needs and delivers on whatever pain points they're trying to get rid of.
Got it. Yeah, that rings true. And how do you think about like the application of data in the actual process, and like what are the sources of data? How do you go about leveraging data? Because like I think there's you can in my own experience, like building our company, we have our ideas of what the customers would want or how they think or perceive our product, but the reality on ground is usually very different. So how do you go about leveraging the data you need to sharpen that insight for how to message or position a product?
Yeah, one of my favorite go-to places is customer reviews. And I remember when I started Remitly, we had thousands of reviews. This was pre-AI or AI working for people. And I got my whole team to actually go through and code all the reviews so we can look for trends. And that's such a powerful source for you. Now, what do you do if you're a company that's just starting out? You have no reviews. Well, you look at the reviews of your competitors. And so often I will go in and look at companies that I'm competing against and see what their Trustpilot reviews look like, what their GT reviews. And the thing that's made it really easy is like this weekend, I actually did something for a client where I used, I think, Perplexity, and I actually was able to tabulate the review count on 15 different variables across 4 different websites. And that took 10 minutes. So yeah, it's just, there's no excuse not to pull in that data. Now, the other thing too is to look at your own kind of first person data, your customer support information that you have. And now with tools like yours, right, you can take all that stuff and you can classify it. And here's the other thing too that I like about AI is it's a consistent approach to how you treat the data. When you do it by hand and a task is really big, you have to assign it to a whole different bunch of people. And no matter how clear you write up the rules for what sentiment, what goes here, everybody's going to do it a little bit differently. So that's the other, I think, value about what you're doing is it's a more consistent and objective approach to interpreting the results.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. I know that we have done research online around like how are people framing the need for a product. Like we'll use like Google, AdWord, keyword, Google Keyword Planner.
Yeah.
Kind of look for some of those queries and things like that. And so like in the process to turn, but yeah, we should do more of like some of the things you said, like looking at our support tickets and using that for insights. But like when you analyze those reviews and you get like the structured output, what do you do with that? Like you said, you came up with a table. Like what do you do with that data?
Yeah.
How do you turn that into like the final thing?
Yeah, so let's say reviews showed that, it looks like people really like this one value prop. Maybe it is the simplicity or the ease of use of our product. Well, let's look at our homepage and any of our landing pages. Do we actually talk about that? And I actually did something where I looked at Monday.com. This is about a year ago. I looked at all their reviews and they looked at their homepage and they didn't even bring up the 3 or 4 things that customers love about them. No, I'm not in there and they may have run some tests, but that would be the first thing I would do is test that on the landing page and see, will that make a difference? And so I think, with data is great to start to get the hypothesis, and then you need to validate that hypothesis through some sort of objective testing framework, like a landing page, if you have enough traffic to do that.
Fantastic. Yeah, like I'd love to dive deeper on that. Like so going into the testing now, the definition of the messaging and the positioning. So what are some of those initial things you do once you have some of those early signals?
Yeah, so I'll test it, and there's a couple ways. I'll do it through just existing landing pages. I'll use paid search. Up until 2 or 3 months ago, I was using outbound email a lot, because with outbound email, what I could do is I could build up segments by industry and by persona or role or title and do outbound email campaigns. Now, the difference between the outbound I'm doing and what some of the BDRs are doing is I'm not trying to get a meeting or I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to get feedback, and I try to actually offer something. So to test things like, hey, we just got some great research back on how CISOs are thinking about security in the next year. Here are the 3 things. So I try to give something rather than ask for something. And just through the responses, I'll be able to say, well, you know what? We got way more engagement in the utility sector versus healthcare. And then that gives me feedback on like what segments are going after and then which role responded to those messages. So I try to look for any way that I could get in touch with people, because outbound email is actually pretty cost effective compared to paid search as well. Now it's a little bit different. You know, you've got on the opposite end of the spectrum, high intent versus no intent, but they're still the same people, and you can get a measure of at least how the general market feels about something.
That's fantastic. That's a great idea. I think we should try that out. So how do you measure engagement? Is it based on like open rates, or like how do you measure engagement with such email?
Yeah, click-through rates. The problem with open rates right now is there can be false positives, because email security systems will automatically open an email. So you think you're doing really well and you're not. And then the tracking that you use for that, I think on Gmail and on Apple has been deprecated. So click-through rates. And you know what? I always like bottom of the funnel. The closer I can get to the bottom of the funnel, I like those metrics better than the top of the funnel stuff.
Got it. And so we can always trust those click-through rates
Yeah,
as like better signal.
yeah, you can measure the click-through rates 2 ways, right? One through your email send platform, what did people click through? And then on the landing page itself, use a UTM code or whatever, how many people actually came to that page.
Yeah, but I read something about bots also like signaling or skewing the visits count on like your analytics. Is that a thing?
Bots can definitely do that. I see that happening more with paid search because there's a financial incentive to drive clicks on the behalf of those sites, but you do have to be careful. And like I remember with one client, we suddenly noticed a ton of traffic coming in from Poland, and we couldn't figure out why and realized it was actually a bot. So
got it. In terms of your like day-to-day now, like let's say in one of your previous roles, how have you tried to, get the feedback directly from customers to continue to refine, your messaging and positioning as the product matures?
yeah, I mean, as many customers interviews as I can now. Sales calls are great. I don't look at those so much for sales coaching as I do for market insights. The only downside is I think it's a little bit more problematic to get recorded calls in the EU, and that's a little bit of a shame. But yeah, there is so much data that we have now about customers, just leveraging what other teams are doing. I think that's a great place to go. I think conferences are a really good place to go too. I love sending product managers to conferences versus salespeople, because it's a great place for them to get feedback on things before we build it, maybe show some wireframes, and build a long-term relationship versus just trying to hit those people up when you're ready to sell.
No, that's a great point. I remember when we were starting out, I went to SaaStr, and that was where we validated the initial concept for like, hey, customer feedback platform for product teams. And the messaging was really resonating with like the VPs of product at the time.
Yeah.
And that was really great. And I'm trying to do it again, like go to more conferences this year and see how I can connect like what we're doing now to the market. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and that's when you look at the other side. Why do people go to conferences? It's to sell, but it's also to learn. And so yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for getting customer feedback.
That's a great point. Now, where do you think, in your experience, like startups make the biggest mistakes when it comes to messaging their product or positioning their product?
Yeah, it's kind of like the PR problem of you need to be first or the best. Gartner, what quadrant are you in? So to be that in the top right thing, you kind of narrow cast in on the one thing you could be number one at, and it's probably something the customer doesn't care about. That's
Yeah.
one. Two is it's just so hard when you're so close to something that you're so passionate about to be objective about it. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. But I think if the startup has an open mind and is willing to test ideas, then I think that's a good start. And it's hard to get social proof, right? Everybody says you want that rating or the review on your website. Well, when you're starting at zero, you don't have any of those things, so that can be a tough challenge. The other thing is just being really clear on who you're talking to, right? Is it an engineering persona? Is it a business persona? And it's so funny how in many cases we're technical companies selling software that do a really bad job sometimes of selling it to the technical people that are generally the first adopters. And I've made that mistake before too. Invested way more in the website because that's what your board sees. That is what your investors see, instead of like focusing on the APIs and documentation, where your true prospects are going to go, and making sure. And where do people invest their time? They're going to probably invest more of their time on their homepage than they would be whatever a developer might use. So being able to know what's important and focus on that, I think is good.
It sounds like there's a layer between like the insights and then the actual like implementation of those ideas, where you have to understand, the audience and, all the ways you want to put out that message. Can you talk to that layer that stands in between?
Yeah, I think too. Also, when you think about data is after the fact, right? So it's kind of behind the curve in some cases. How do you get ahead of it? And that's why I do think being able to just brainstorm with people and say, what do you think? You don't have to back it up with data. And I think I did that before recently when I was going through personas. I was looking at the titles of people that first interacted with our product, and there was one title that wasn't in there, and our head of sales says, no, you should really look at this role. You should really look at this role. I said, but I have no data on it. Well, that's because you're not marketing to it. And so I said, you know what, let's just test it. And he was right. So I think you need to make sure that you can get ideas without necessarily having the data to prove it at the beginning. You'll do that later when you do your testing. And I think that is part of the process of socialization and getting alignment and getting to know that, hey, anybody can come up with ideas, and the best ideas are going to win by how our customers vote on those ideas. Does that answer your question in terms of how do you actually get the buy-in and the execution?
Yeah, it was more around like you have those insights about what the potential message and positioning is, but then I need to execute it in my channels or my collaterals. But I need to figure out the best way to, implement those ideas. And, to your point around, hey, developers, you put spend more time on the APIs or documentation versus a website. I was thinking like there's a layer in between where you need to do some form of, deeper analysis or understanding to know how to better, insert those messaging ideas or positioning statements into the touch points for your customer.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the framework that people use where they have, here's my positioning at the very top, here are the key messaging points underneath it, and then if there's different personas, here are the messages for those personas? Exactly. I think that type of document is great. Just keep it bare bones, and that way that could be used by your PR team, your social media team, your sales team. In fact, I think you want to give your BDRs and your sales team the most flexibility to kind of experiment, because they're also at the front line of your message testing. And I used to sit by our BDRs just because I wanted to hear what they were saying and how they're talking. And I think until you've got product market fit, you really need to give those teams the freedom to experiment and learn. And there are some things where I took ideas from those BDRs. One of them was this a guy named John Barney. He was a BDR, really good. Say hello to him every day. How's it going? Best day ever. When he talked to clients how's it going? Best day ever. And he was like, why is it the best day ever? And he would talk. And it was so fitting for our product because the product we were selling were employee engagement solutions. So how do you make employees happier at work? And he was living, walking proof of that. And so we did a whole campaign around this. And so that was just a good source of ideas, not necessarily data driven, but a way to get an idea to test that worked.
Yeah. What do you think about messaging for startups versus like more mature product lines? What's the big difference there?
Yeah, I think with startups, your initial customers are going to be early adopters, right? They're going to be comfortable. They want to be on the bleeding edge. So I think you have to talk to customers in the way that gets them excited about that. They're going to be a little bit more risk tolerant. So you don't necessarily have to bring up those things, but be ready for the InfoSec review when that comes along. And so, and then as you get more successful, it's the classic crossing the chasm. The type of customers that you get are going to be late adopters, are going to have a different set of concerns. So you might need to tweak your messaging for them. That's one. Two, you got to do the pufferfish moves, which is how, as a startup, do you make yourself look bigger than you really are? So one of the things I like to do is content webinars, like interview a thought leader at a big name company in your space, right? Put that on your blog, like figure out ways that people can kind of associate with you to something they know of to create that kind of bonded trust. And usually startups, they are tip of the spear, pioneering something new. They may be inventing a category that was never there before. So be comfortable, do that. Like tell people what this new category you're doing. Maybe it's not inbound marketing, maybe it's not outbound, maybe it's something completely new. And so build some education around that. And the last thing is I really like the challenger sales methodology. And that has a huge impact on marketing because the challenger sales method really is for disruptive products where you want to kind of really educate the market about what's going on. So that's the teaching. You want to target and tailor your message, and then you want to control the process. And that can be done in sales, but sales is much more effective when they have marketing helping them with that teach part, the education part of what you're doing as a company.
Yeah, that's super interesting. One thing I've found in our experience is that it's easier. So you talk about like category creation. Like, I don't think we want to like double down on those kind of opportunities, right? And that's because I found that it's more difficult to bring a product to market, like in a new category, right? Except you have a lot of funding, brand equity, relationships, things like that. And so it's easier, I've found, to just position your product around something people already understand, a concept, a market, an opportunity, a space. So how do you balance that? You need to show that you're taking a new approach to something.
That's
and you also need to like help the customer map what you're doing to something, right?
Yeah. I think it's context appropriate. So I would say invest the effort when you truly don't fit in another category. That's when you need to do it. If you do fit in another category, you're just doing to spin, don't put the effort into it. But if your product is misunderstood because it is in the wrong category, then you need to put your own spin on it, or stay within the category, but really be really clear. So, example, prior to the company I started, I was at Spire. We did satellites, and our clear differentiators. Most space companies were focused on getting people to Mars and exploring the world outside of us. Our company was the one focused on planet Earth. So we were using our satellites to help track things, predict weather, like how could satellites be used to make life better on Earth? And that's how we position ourselves, is we're the space company focused on planet Earth. And so we're still in the category of space, but that was our special twist and spin on it. And that was great because it really was also part of our mission. And that's the other thing too, I think, to think about messaging and positioning is there are definitely very mission-based companies out there. So a lot of times your positioning may be defined by that.
Got it. Yeah, That is super interesting. How do you think about, has there been a time when the data was saying something and then your intuition was kind of pointing in a different direction and you have that tension there? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I remember this is a long time ago. Do you remember Google used to have this thing called this Google Tools search bar? It was like
Yes.
a little search bar, and they would pay you to get an install of that. So it was great. I was at Real Networks. We had a music product that we gave away for free, and we had to figure out, well, how we actually pay for the music licenses. And so we did a deal with Google to install the toolbar, and the product manager, who's very, very, customer friendly guy, says, "Yep, we should do this. Not a problem. I can make it work." It's like, I don't know. This seems kind of scammy, spammy. It's more friction. He goes, "No, I think I can do it in a way that it'll work." And I was convinced that there was no way we would be able to get the sign up rates we had in the past by introducing this friction, and they stayed exactly the same. People just A, they didn't care, or B, they actually wanted it, and the pull of the free music was enough. So yeah, definitely that was just an example of, a lot of times I think things and then I actually see the data and it changes, or the results are surprising. Another example is and this is an example where you kind of have to look at the data, but really qualitative or really interviews and talking to customers is really important for understanding the why. So I may be able to tell you, hey, a lot of people click here because of this value prop, right? But I can't tell you why. So you really need to get and talk to customers to understand the why. So at Remitly, we were online competing against, at that time, brick and mortar stores like the Western Union that you would go into to send money back home. And in our interviews, we heard that part of the concerns that people wouldn't use this is just trust. Like, we don't know you. At least with my Western Union, I can go into the store. There's nobody for me to call. So it's like, okay, let's just put a phone number on our landing page. And so we talked about it. It's like, oh man, a phone number, that's gonna be $20 per call. This is going to just really explode our business case if we do this. And so let's just try it for a week. And we did, and we got no calls. It was an A/B test, but the landing page with the phone number did statistically significant, did better. And we found out later, it gave people the comfort, like just knowing they had somebody to call. They weren't necessarily going to use it, helped give them the next level of trust to be able to click through on that. So I think data tells you one thing, but also understanding the why behind that data is really important too.
Interesting. I'm probably going to ask the team to add my number to the website next week.
Yeah, nobody's going to call. Except now you're getting a lot of salespeople calling you.
Now, you talk about data, like most of the time when you hear about messaging or positioning, you're thinking like customer reviews, interviews, like the qualitative side of things. Where does quant come in, solidifying like your thinking or your approach to messaging and positioning?
Yeah, I think the quantitative side comes in on the actual results. So like A/B testing, was that variance different? And then on the data side, what metrics are you using? So I've definitely seen situations where we measured success on the first transaction. So how many people bought for the first time on this landing page. Then a lot of times what I would do is go back like 6 months after that and say, let me look at that data again and the cohort of people that signed up this page and versus this one to see on a lifetime basis which performed better. So that's another way data I think can be used. It's not just to use it, but to know what data to use at what point in time, because there are definitely leading indicators that'll pop very early, but over time something actually may perform better by virtue of the type of customer that a variant of a test picked up.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting. You talk a lot about landing pages, like on this chat.
Yeah.
Are you talking about B2C like products or B2B products?
Yeah, that's a great point. I've done both B2B and B2C. B2C is wonderful because of volume of pages that you have. B2B gets really tricky. I mean, B2C, we could run a test every week or every 2 days. B2B, I have to wait 3 or 4 weeks. And in many cases, you cannot get statistical significance on B2B. Just and you have to know that. So I still think you should make decisions based on data, but just know that it's not conclusive and there could have been some randomness. And even when you do have really good data, we're not a lab. There's so many variables that we don't control that could be happening in the background. And one variable, depending on what you're testing, might be more sensitive to changes in interest rates or time of the year. So nothing's ever perfect. And so you do the best you can with what you have and make those decisions.
Yeah, interesting. How do you collaborate with your team, in this type of work? Like, I don't know if you've ever had like maybe small degree of conflict, maybe like a CEO or some other like stakeholders around like the messaging and positioning work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Is that a thing, and how have you navigated that?
Yeah, it used to be a thing. Like I used to hate homepage redesigns just because of politics that would go. It's funny. Everybody would focus on the homepage, but there's actually more traffic to all the side pages. But fine, you want to worry about that. And yeah, it was just we burnt so much energy through that. But over time now, I don't mind testing anything. Now again, in B2C you can do that. B2B it's a little bit difficult, so you do have to navigate and make some of those changes. And that's not as bad. I think the toughest thing, and it's changed, is it was tough, I think, for a lot of designers to shift to the data-driven world. And really, and I invested a lot of time with educating, providing the tools, and the ones that embrace that change had done very, very well. The ones that haven't, I think, they're kind of stuck in the past. But
Mm.
I don't think design and brand should be top down. This is what I think. I really believe the data should tell you what's best. Now, you could argue that maybe Apple and Steve Jobs never looked at market research data, but there's always going to be anomalies, and I'm not going to be close to Steve Jobs, and nor will most people. So for the most part, but I think it was getting design teams on board. Now most of them really embraced it, and it's made a tool for them so they can make the right decisions based on how customers feel about designs.
Interesting. I think there's like, in B2B especially, like you said, there's that identity thing around like the messaging and positioning, statements like, hey, is this who we are? Is this what we want to be about? Is this what we represent? And getting buy-in can be a challenge to put, ideas like that out there.
Yeah, and also because startups are in flux. The product market fit, who they're targeting, their strategy is going to change, right? So it's always I think it's going to be very, very fluid. And this is where I think maybe where branding can be very helpful. So with branding, those are going to be your tenets about who you are as a company that should not change over time. And those are things like you want to be focused on transparency, on building trust. Those are timeless qualities you want with your customers, no matter what your strategy is. So I still think you can always focus on those things. And it's through the positioning that you can be a lot more flexible about how you adjust based on the segment you're in and the product or the strategy you're trying to pursue.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just like, going deeper on that, how do you suggest like startups evolve that messaging over time? Like, I know there's some like influencers or experts on this topic on LinkedIn, and they have this like graphics where they show like, hey, this is how you should do it in startup land versus like mature companies. But I also see criticisms of like more mature companies who aren't getting it right. So like, what's the journey to evolve from a really tiny company, as you scale, evolving that messaging and positioning? What's the strategy around that?
Yeah, I think we're in a world that's changing. We truly are going to be going to a one-to-one world. And the only reason we don't do one-to-one now is we can't, right? But when we can, we will do that. And so I think our messages will evolve a little bit better to what the customer is looking for. And we do some of that today, right? For people, for example, doing paid search, they have landing pages or offers that will adjust depending on what paid search terms they're on. So I think that's one thing they'll shift. One thing too, I think I would be very careful of is any framework. Great example is a lot of people love the story brand framework and the hero's journey. And you might be able to understand this. So when I was at Remitly, our whole brand was based on this hero's journey of the immigrant coming to a new country, making sacrifices to send money back home. And they're the hero, right? They're the hero facing all those obstacles. And that sounds great, right? That's so noble. Well, and we used it. The problem is it just was not connecting with customers. It's like, why is this not working? And I realized that a lot of the people didn't consider themselves heroes. Like that may have been a way somebody else thought, but they were actually uncomfortable with that. So I went actually back into the original research that was being done. And then I looked at the findings. It's like, wow, this is just different. Then I had a new person on my team go back to the original research. It's just like, why don't you start all over again, use this research, tell me what your findings are. She came up with a completely different answer. And so it is really hard to remove bias as people from how we look at data. That bias becomes even stronger when you have a template or construct that you're trying to fit it in. I mean, when you're buying software company for a company or whatever, you're not thinking of yourself as a hero. It's just your damn job, right?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes too, the frameworks can actually take out the intent and the nuance of what somebody is doing. And again, this is what I like about AI is at least it may not be right, but it's going to be consistent in how it looks at a set of data versus people, no matter how objective, are always going to interpret things a little bit differently.
Fantastic. I think it's worth closing on that note. Around AI, what technologies are you super excited by these days in this area?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, a year ago, I did not like using AI, and I was really concerned that, and I'm a marketer, right? And so I'm the first one to do whatever search marketing there is and flood the market with a whole bunch of stuff. And I saw that happening. But it's actually really ridiculous, right? If you're going to AI to write about a topic, probably means you actually don't know about it. So what value are you adding in the equation, right? You're using a bunch of GPUs that are polluting the environment. Like, what are you doing? And so I was actually really annoyed with AI, even though I did it. So, and I could just tell when things were written by it. And then I tried some things and it was not great, but it just gets better. And now that's all I use it for everything. And it's amazing the type of stuff you can find. And it's just gotten better and better. So I'm a huge fan of it. I use all the different ones depending on the purpose or whatever. The one thing AI doesn't do that great, and they're fixing it. Have you created an image with Dolly or whatever?
It's not great.
It can't spell, right? Like I was doing an ad for something for childhood education, like they spelled childhood wrong. It's like, and it took forever to fix it, but that's going to be corrected. And I know somebody that's already done that. So no, I'm really excited. But what I'm even more excited about is I'm actually working on a lot of CRM systems right now for clients, and I'm a little scared to invest too much into it with clients because I think it's going to change. It has to change, right? The way we do workflows and everything is still based on putting people into buckets, and it's got to get to a more custom, bespoke, one-to-one approach. Like if you're HubSpot and you know what people are clicking on, what they're connecting with, you should be able to create a nurture flow based on those activities versus having somebody else try to put somebody in different buckets and segments to do that. So I think we're going to see a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah. We've seen that on our end as well. Like there's so many signals and data points about prospects, about buyers, customers, and there's an opportunity to personalize the messaging, the interactions with them, leveraging those data points, and the LLMs make that possible at scale today.
Yeah. So I think there's going to be some good stuff happening. And I don't know if it's going to be from really traditional players. I think it could be a startup that just goes in and nails it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for your time.
Yeah.
It was great. And yeah, maybe next time we go deeper into more examples, more case studies, more stories. But this was fun. Thank you so much for
Well,
joining
thanks
us.
for the opportunity, and keep it going. You're doing great stuff. I look forward to seeing more.